share with you something that I've shared. I didn't know this is. When I did this in my church, there's a few. Has any of you ever seen these decals in the back of a boat or car or something? Well, you might not see them here. We're in the Midwest, not close to the ocean. They're not too close, are they? But these, I don't guess anybody here has one then if you haven't seen them, have you? But the sermon came from a little decal and a vehicle. So let's see what we get out of the salt life. Okay? Salt life. Originally, it was stick on the back of the vehicle to denote a circle. Right? Surf, bodybuilders. You might think California right now, they're up there by the ocean. Or a beach bum. Good cat on the beach all the time. And if you notice someone whose life centered around the ocean are related to ocean-going activities. It says the trend is even spread to senior citizens. Wannabe hipsters, like soccer moms and others looking to inform the world that they too have visited the ocean at some point in their life. Way over. I'm not sure one, but went by, our vehicle passed me by. It had salt life in the back. That was over in Indiana, so. West, salt life on it. The sticker represents a passion for the ocean, salt air, and a way of life. There is a salt life for Christians as well. Can we have the other one when we talked about Cheyenne? The one that had the Salt Life Church. Can you find that one? He's gonna have to look for it. At my church, I had to. We've got an AV thing, but I had to put that up for you to look at. Here we got a bigger one. Oops, excuse me. Just the symbol there. That's all we need. I'm going to talk about the Salt Life Church today. There's a Salt Life for Christians as well. Let me say a few words about salt and history right now to see its maybe in its importance, both literally and figuratively. Ellen White tells us that salt is necessary for our life. In Counsels on Diets and Foods, page 344, Ellen White says, I use some salt and always have, because salt, instead of being deleterious, is actually essential for the blood. Now, I had a pastor down in Florida, Ray Pichette. You might know that name. Anybody ever heard that name, Ray Pichette? Used to be president of, the conference? Used to be your president of the conference. I knew him before then, down in Port Charlotte. And he had to have a lot of salt. He put salt in his water. And I don't know what that condition is where you have to have a lot of salt. What is it? You know what it is, Ruth?
I can't remember, but he would have to take lots of salt.
He had to have lots of salt in his life. But too much salt is not usually too good. If you have too much salt, you can increase your thirst, okay? Which you don't want to drink salt water, of course, but salt can increase your thirst. It will be an irritant. It can be an irritant. It can lead to help increase the chance of type 2 diabetes, an overactive bladder. It can cause swelling or bloating in strange places. I didn't look up those strange places. Maybe your feet, but I don't know. That wouldn't seem too strange, would it? Some other places. Frequent mild headaches. You crave, it causes you to crave salty foods. Well, what does that do? Cause you to get, well, and it also causes you to eat more salt, which leads to some of these problems. And drink more too. Short term, it can ruin the taste of food. Some of you may have known a lady named May Adams. You ever heard of her? May Lemon? She was my teacher for my first 5 years of school. She was also our Pathfinder leader. Debbie, you remember that? Might be the only one. And while we were in school, we also did Pathfinder things, and we had to do some outdoor skills, some camping skills. So we spent one of our school days and the nights even, we went out camping. We hiked and went camping. And in the morning, we had to make our own breakfast. I think in that case, we had to have an egg, and we have to have a fried egg. So I don't have very good fine motor. I didn't do very well with the frying the egg. It took me like 3 times. Finally, I got it. Looked good. And I took it to her, okay. She says, okay, now you got to eat it. Well, that's a little different. So I got some salt out because I always salted my eggs at home. Well, guess what? Little too much salt. I think it took me a half hour to eat that egg. You eat it. Oh, terrible, terrible taste. But I made it because I wanted to get my honor. So too much salt can ruin the taste of things. In a figurative and spiritual sense, it can cause a person to find our witnessing distasteful. Ruth and I moved to Manchester, Kentucky, and there was a little park there that had a track around it, and we would go walking. We hadn't been there but a week or two, and we went walking, and there's this older gentleman walking around with us, and so as we were walking by, we said, hi, how you doing, so on and so forth. And we started talking with him, and I don't know how the subject came up. I honestly don't. But he says, yeah, there's an Adventist person in town there, and he says, they just beat you to death with their witnessing and so on and so forth. They just weren't good witnesses. He says, he didn't have a very good, favorable opinion of Adventists. Well, guess who didn't tell him he was Adventist? Well, we didn't say anything, but we talked. He was a nice guy. So your witnessing can be too much. It can be too salty. Wow. Ellen White counsels several times about the free use, and I think free use means too much. Free use of salt. She says on counsels diet and foods on page 340, food should be prepared in a simple a manner as possible, free from condiments, spices, and from the undue amount of salt. Now, literal salt has had important uses throughout history as well as today. And we're going to kind of compare some things in history that actually happened to some spiritual ideas for salt. Okay? First of all, in history, as well as today, salt is used for seasoning. It increases the taste of whatever you're eating. It enhances the flavor. Colossians 4:6 says, and this goes to our Sabbath school this morning, if you remember that. Y'all remember what Sabbath school is about? Yeah. What? Resurrection. Okay, I'm sorry. The superintendent's remarks. What was the superintendent's remarks? First things she was talking to us about today. Okay? Maybe this will spark your memory. Colossians 4:6. Did you read Colossians 4:6? Okay, I think she read Colossians 4:6. You might remember it. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. I like to think that means if you speak with grace, you won't have any problem answering what someone asks, and you will not be offensive to them in whatever you say. So our speech, that's what she was talking about today, the words we say, not just out in public, but also at home. I have a lot to learn from that. I had a lot to learn anyway. So we want to season our speech what we say with salt. Salt was a unit of exchange. People would barter salt for other goods. They say, look, I'll give you so much salt if you'll give me whatever they wanted. It's very important. During some periods in history, and depending on where you lived, salt could be worth more than gold. Can't eat gold, can you? And enhances it. We haven't gotten to another one that it does, but salt does a lot of things. And if you didn't have any salt, you were in sad shape. So you could get more. It was worth more than gold. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt. We get the word salary. The soldiers were paid, and when you're paid, some people get a salary. And that comes from the word salt, from the root word salt. And we always like to say, someone is worth their salt. Are you worth your salt? Okay, so that was used for payments. Now, of course, we're saved by grace, right? It's not what we say or do. Well, it is, but we're saved by grace. But we also do works. Our love for Christ leads us to do works. Are we worth our salt? Salt is also a symbol of friendship and loyalty. Sometimes in ancient Bible customs, they talked about said that once you've eaten a man's salt, you're a friend for life. And they would sometimes bind their covenants with salt. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Salt is and was used as, can you believe this? A disinfectant. Now, I always thought that rubbing salt in somebody's wounds was a bad thing. I really did. But it's proven that for a short time, you can put salt on wounds, cuts, burns, as well as food and other objects, etc. And it'll kill some of the bacteria, or at least inhibit the growth of bacteria. So the salt keeps the wound not necessarily clean, but from getting worse. So there's just something to remember. Maybe we can be salt and help some wounded people in life. Hopefully it won't be short time. Here's something interesting. You know, when you do these things, you have to do a little research. And when you do some research, you find out things you never ever knew. Even though I've read this, both in the Bible and other places, I guess it never stuck with me. But in the Bible time, salt was used in the ceremony offerings. This is Jewish ceremony offerings as a covenant. What's a covenant? An agreement. The salt was an example of, if you do this, I'll do that. It's an agreement. It's something that we want to bind ourselves to. And I'm going to read some things on that, if you don't mind. We'll read Luke 2:13. I don't know if you want to go to that or not. These are probably some words of Christ. Luke 2:13. No, it doesn't. Luke 2:13. Wow. I wonder if that's Mark. Could that be Mark? Because it's certainly not Luke 2:13. I don't even think it's Mark 2:13, but we'll see. No. All right. Oh, I know it's not Luke. Let me see. What would that be? It's in the Old Testament. I'm going to just read it to you. This is from the Old Testament. It says, "Season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offerings, and add salt to all your offerings. And that's probably in Deuteronomy. Let me double check that. Deuteronomy 2:13. I don't know why I put Luke. Yeah, it's not in Deuteronomy 2:13 either. All right, sorry. It's in the Bible. Some of you can look that up later today. That's a little assignment for you. And Desire of Ages, page 439, says this. In the ritual service, salt was added to every sacrifice. This, like the offering of incense, signified that only the righteousness of Christ could make the service acceptable to God. Referring to this practice, Jesus said, every sacrifice shall be salted with salt. Have salt in yourselves and have peace with one another. All who would present themselves a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, must receive the saving salt, the righteousness of our Savior. Then they become the salt of the earth, restraining evil men among them, as salt preserves from corruption. Which brings it, salt preserves from corruption. This leads us to another use of salt. Our early pioneers, you heard of salted pork? And some of these places, salt was used as a preservative. Yeah. It says, we are to be the salt of the earth, restraining evil among men, as salt preserves from corruption. Salt has long been used as preservative. It draws out the water and reduces the water activity of food, slowing down or halting microbial growth or bacteria, so the food will be edible for a longer period of time. I'll read something else here from Prophets and Kings, page 232. The salt must be mingled with the substance to which it is added. It must penetrate, infuse it, that it may be preserved. So it is through personal contact and association that men are reached by the saving power of the gospel. They are not saved as masses, but as individuals. Your personal influence, my personal influence, is a power. But remember the story. You don't want to be too salty, do you? No, let's not be too salty. Let's go back to Matthew 5:13. Let me read a couple other things here, I think. No, we'll get to those. Matthew 5:13. You probably know the first several words. Ye are what? Ye are the salt of the earth. But, in a lot of my sermons, there's always a but there. Because you got to make, what does a but do in a sentence? Okay, it says, you got this, but there's the opposite, right? It's the opposite. But, if the salt has lost his savor, wherewith shall it be salted? Well, it is thenceforth good for nothing but to cast out and be trodden under the foot of man. If a Christian, says, but if Christians are such a name only, they are like salt that has lost its savor. They have no influence for good in the world. Through their misrepresentations of God, they are worse than unbelievers. So if I'm a Christian, I can claim to be a Christian, but if my acts and my words aren't Christ-like, I'm worse than an unbeliever. I misrepresent God. It says also here, ye are the salt of the earth, Jesus said. This is the but on the other side. This is the good side, all right? Do not withdraw yourselves from the world in order to escape persecution. You are to abide among men, that the savor of the divine love may be as salt to preserve the world from corruption. That's a great power that you and I have, right? We have the power to preserve, or we have the power to what? Corrupt. Are you a salt? Are you the salt of the earth, as Christ wants us to be? Are you part of the salt church? You can be seasoning. You can be worth your salt. You can be a loyal friend. You can be in a covenant relationship with God. You can be a preserver of the people for God. But if you lose your savor or all your good qualities in your life, you're no longer good for anything. Jesus said, we are to be the salt of the earth. I pray that God can look down on each one of us, you and me, and say, you're worth your salt. You are the salt of the earth. God bless your salt life. And what do we do next? What? Closing song.